Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, followed by Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, and Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children, followed up by Raised by These Wolves, Volume 2, Child Trafficking Through Foster Care and Court Systems, that was just recently released on July 19th and turned into a bestseller that day. Please feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going, and you can find that in the podcast notes. And I have a return guest. I have Laurie Smith, and she's been on multiple times. We are going to talk about the ACEs scores and the assumption that we feel privileged that this family court CPS will never happen to us. And I totally welcome you, Laurie. I'm so glad to have you on. I just love talking to you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I knew you had published books. I did not realize that you were at Ford. I did not realize you had a bestseller.
Oh,
Bravo.
yeah.
That's so
Yay.
wonderful. Unfortunately, not so great of a topic, but it
Right.
does sound like it's making an effect for people. That's amazing. Good
Thank
job.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you're doing well with your Clouded Compass podcast as well.
Thank you.
And we're going to have an awesome discussion about what can happen when you enter into these dark courtrooms where these judges wear these black robes from hell.
Yeah. And I actually think it starts a long time before the courtroom. So that's kind of what I'd like to dig in because
Yes.
I think it's we're under the mistaken belief that only bad people go to court or only a certain population goes to court. You're, I just think we're under some illusions that don't have things to worry about. And so the topic today is a little bit tough to handle. I want us all to ask ourselves to go through. I'm going to ask the questions of the ACEs and let's just explain what the ACEs are. So about probably 15 years ago now, I could be off on my numbers, but it's around that time. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, this is way before COVID,
Mhm.
did a study with Kaiser Permanente out in California. And they took their population of health recipients and they tested them for these factors in their childhood. And you can go to the CDC to learn more about how that arrived at a study and all of that. But what they found from that study really kind of threw healthcare providers and mental health workers off of their game because we had not been asking about these things. And as it turns out, as we will talk about, this matters. And it matters to whoever's listening because I want you to ask yourself about your own experience with these things and the experience of your partners and spouses, the experiences your children have, the experiences of the legal team that you have, and maybe even the judges and the police force. All of these ACEs are not, they don't discriminate. And I'll share personally in my own life, you know, I've had a lot of things come to my awareness in my 40s. Thank you, perimenopause, for like
Aw.
just derailing my entire life. But what I did not know until after I myself experienced systemic and psychiatric harm for 5 years was that if I had known my ACEs score, if anybody had known my ACEs score, A, we could have predicted this because my ACEs was an 8
Mm.
out of 10. But B, we could have addressed things in a much different, less harmful, more person centered way, which is how I'm trained ethically. But I think if the courts don't know about this, it is something you could utilize in your court case
Mhm.
in terms of the ACEs and every day that we put a child in harm, their ACEs are going up, and that's not just the court doing that. That's obviously the people they're around and all that. But we can talk about all that. So that's my brief introduction to the ACEs.
Yes. And I know you had some things that we can pull up on the screen to show people
Yeah.
ACEs score test looks like.
Yes. Yeah, it's an easy 10 questions. I'd like to go through it with the population that, your audience, if that's okay. We can
Oh, yeah.
self take the test ourselves
Oh,
internally,
yeah.
but
Definitely.
it's an eye opener. So if you think honestly, well, I'll get to that later, but let me see if I can zoom this in. There we go. Okay. So just 10 questions. First question, and these are just yes or no, but you're going to add up how many yeses you have. Number one, did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you.
No.
Now, these are very subjective things. So let's say mom and dad are, over, they're working overtime, and you maybe don't necessarily have to wear dirty clothes, but maybe you had to find your own food, or maybe you felt like they were not able and safe enough to protect you if they're sort of fighting with their partner or spouse or whatever. So number one, did you feel like you didn't have enough to eat, wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you? Number two, did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reasons? This applies to every child that we are talking about in the court system. However, how many of their parents does this also apply to?
Mm-hmm. Even
It,
through like emotional unavailability.
other reason, yes. This is where I put in a plug for intergenerational trauma. This
Mm.
is not about blaming anybody, period. This is about taking a look at what we are working with so that we can be strategically different in how we address the root causes, not just dad's being an asshole and we're going to court about it. Well, I don't know what dad's childhood was like. That doesn't make it right or wrong what he's doing now, but did he have the skills to not abandon his child? Did, you know, there's a whole bunch of other questions we could be asking if we started looking in this direction. Okay, so did you lose a parent for any reason, basically? Number three, did you live with anyone who was depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? That could be a sibling. It could be a parent in a court case. It could be a parent in a domestic violence situation afraid to make a court case.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a parent overworked. All of those things. Then let's go again to the lawyers and the judges we're working with. How many of us, I did not have the privilege of growing up in a family without mental illness on both sides. I am fourth generation with mental health and substance use issues. If somebody could have nudged me and said, hey, that's kind of a factor, my life would have been completely different. No blame for anybody. I'm just suggesting mental illness, and particularly in today's time when we are dealing with community traumas like COVID, like virtual working from home, like the climate that we have culturally, all of these, like the depression and mental ill is almost a given at this point, unfortunately, in this culture. Not always, but because I just look at the rates that we prescribe antidepressants in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Number four, did you live with anybody who had a problem drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? That is often something we don't talk about in families, but also, again, for any child growing up in that aligns their life and brain development in certain ways. And again, this is not about people being right or wrong, but this does explain our adult behaviors in terms of, well, I became a social worker precisely because of this.
Mm-hmm.
I might have married my partner precisely because I grew up with something like this. The judge may have a bias because they grew up with something like this. These are important things to think about when we are enacting legal with the personal, social, emotional issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number five, did your parents or adults in the home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm each other? Again, domestic violence, we know the statistics on that. We also know that we have current campaign folks, telling us that it's safer to be in a relationship married as opposed to apart. But if there's anybody in the home that is emotionally, physically abusive, religious trauma falls under this, because the trauma and the trauma impacts the brain development of the child. Once again, I'm not just talking about the children. I'm talking about when the children are raised and they have behaviors that look like things you'll find in the court, which we'll look at in a second.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Number six, did you live with anyone who went to jail or prison? Now, we are privileged, maybe, that this has not happened in our families. It happened in my family, both sides of my family. My cousins had a parent in jail,
Yep.
and we were white middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Again, their behavior was a result of substance use, which again didn't start with them. It started with the family, the generation before and the generation before that. So we're just spreading out the lens here and what this sort of brings into our awareness in terms of like what's going on with these children and their parents.
Mhm.
Us, what's going on with us? Number 7, did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? I can't tell you how many times a family will look good on the outside, but the stressors of the current living circumstances and workplace and all of that really lead us into behaviors that none of us are proud of. Every parent I know has sworn at their kid. Okay, maybe not sworn, but definitely yelled at their kid. Okay,
Right.
so this is a pretty normative thing. Now, insulting and putting you down, that is abuse.
Mhm.
But also, if you're so stressed out from a court case that you don't have your own coping tools and this is coming, you're going to spill it out how in unwanted ways.
Mhm.
Um, and that also, again, like these lawyers that are so mean and cruel, like I have to wonder what their aces are. Like
Yeah.
they're really, really abusive in the courtroom.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Number 8, did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? That's pretty transparent. It's physical abuse. Number
Mhm.
9, did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special?
Mhm.
Again, these are very subjective things, but these are for people to answer on their own. And if you have somebody distracted in a court case, or you're being told that the other parent doesn't love you, or that the court is indicating that your family is not okay and you are in an unsafe place, but the court is making you more unsafe, that is a very, very highly traumatic experience for a child. On top of which, how many lawyers and judges and parents for that matter are behaving as adults based on this information that their brain wired as a child
Mhm.
because they didn't, you have to succeed at all costs, you have to win the case at all costs, you have to, you have to be on the right side of justice, which changes with every person. And then number 10, did you experience unwanted sexual contact like fondling, intercourse, penetration? Again, something we do not talk about in this culture is how common, unfortunately, child sexual abuse is, whether it's in your own home, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your coaches, whether it's in your religions, and all of those things. Um, a trusted friend. So we that has been going on since the beginning of time. I mean, I'm not even going to get into child sexual assault, but I think the key I want to point out is that we all think it happens to somebody else.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, okay, so those are the 10 general questions. You can get this on the CDC. Um, this is from out of ACEs Aware, the screening. Now, if every doctor's office was doing its job, it would be asking its clients these questions. Why am I talking about this? Why is this so important? Well, it's not just, oh my God, we're failing the children. Again, like I said, if after 5 years of my own psychiatric harm, had somebody come up to me and given me this 10-question test and I scored an 8, we would have already known I had been traumatized. And when somebody is traumatized, their brain development changes according to those threats. It is an adaptation and survival skill. It is actually a good thing that our brains wire in the face of danger. The issue is when we wire for survival only, when the children do not feel safe as children in a school shooting situation, in a domestic violence situation, they grow up into adults that don't have the brain wiring
That's
familiarity
right.
with executive functioning skills. Now, executive functioning is in the prefrontal cortex. That is our problem solving, our task making, our ability to negotiate. This isn't a good idea. This is a good idea. Um, the strategies. That's where we come up with all the solutions. And if we have brain wiring for survival only, we are always going to be on high alert. I'll show you some pictures later to what this leads to behaviorally and health wise. But if we are always wired to be on high alert and we don't have the coping skills or the
Mhm.
practice with executive functioning, you start to see things like ADHD, you start to see things like autism, you start to see things like CPTSD, anxiety, depression, and health problems, which are then going to become innocently a barrier as an adult, a barrier to a good quality of life. So just some pictures for you. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast?
You're going great. You're going great.
Okay.
So what you're saying also is these kids, there's no autonomy. They can't think for themselves. That's what I'm seeing.
Well, to think for ourselves requires that we get out of the survival mode and
Mhm.
get into the thriving mode. The surviving part of us is in the back of the brain. That's in the limbic system. They call it the lizard brain.
Mhm.
It is very animalistic, and you see that in. I'm sorry, but you see that all over in our culture right now. You see low impulse control. You see reactivity. You see irritability. You see people who can't have a conversation with each other in our current climate. But if you think back 10, 15, 20 years, we had 9/11. Well, first of all, we had COVID about 5 years ago. We had 9/11. And before that, we had jobs being taken away on a sort of mass level with NAFTA and all of these. So you can see the progression of this socially and where it's leading us. We do not have the ability as easily to think, and this is my own pet peeve, to think with common sense.
Mhm.
Two things about that. I'm not really a big proponent of common sense right now because the common sense does not sit with my values and ethics. But even bigger than that, common sense, in order to have sense, you have to be safe enough in the world to know what your senses are. But if you're constantly in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn state, you disassociate from yourself in multiple ways. So you don't know what your own sense is. So we're raising children that don't know how to communicate, which is very convenient. Don't know how to communicate, don't know how to think, extensively, problem solving. Their impulse control is off, and those are the children that are going to grow up and be in the court system, whether it's family court system, the criminal court system, the mental health system, all of these things. Now, again, I am I am passionate about this, but this is not the end of the story. So we will get to some solutions. But first, I just want to paint the picture a little bit better and follow it through the lifespan.
Okay.
Okay, so these are some things that the person is at risk for later in life. Traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD. I got to take my glasses off. Unintended pregnancy, pregnancy complications, fetal death, HIV, STDs, cancer, diabetes, alcohol abuse, unsafe sex, substance use, education, occupation, and income. The ACEs affect all areas of that. Again, if you don't know your ACEs, you're going to blame yourself for having, obtaining a substance use issue or having a mental illness, and et cetera, and so on. Some other pictures and how this looks behaviorally. Behaviors, lack
Mm.
of physical activity, smoking. Oh my God. I could literally be rich if I counted all of the adults in the 70s that were smoking.
Right. Right.
And all of them
Everybody.
that were using alcohol. And then they had children, which again is neither, it's not really a blame, but I want to follow the intergenerational trauma and genetics here. Drug
Mm.
use, missed work. So that's the behavior. It can look like low impulse control. It can look like ADHD. It can look like reactivity. And physically and mentally, and this is where really it does the worst damage. And by the way, all of these up in the behavior, those are things that increase the risk of criminal involvement.
Mhm.
Physical and mental health. So it can affect obesity because our immune and inflammation system is messed up. Higher risk of diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease,
Oh,
cancer, stroke, COPD, broken bones. And again, your evidence of this. So those are some physical and mental things that it can come out. I just want to have this in a different picture for everybody
mhm.
because I really like how it shows this is not just a personal deficit. If we have poverty, if we have discrimination, if we have community disruption, with school shootings, if we have lack of opportunity, mobility, and social capital for
Mhm.
housing quality and affordability, if mom and dad are stressed about paying the bills,
Mm.
that is going to impact the ACEs. Violence, that then the more external things that we can focus on. So that's the underlying root causes. Then that turns out in domestic violence, substance use, emotional and sexual abuse, which is often why we're getting out of these divorces in the first place, I would think. Maternal depression, physical and emotional neglect, divorce, mental illness, incarceration, homelessness. Just a picture of the root leads to the leaves of the tree, and then we grow more trees, and then it just gets more entrenched if you don't deal with intergenerational trauma. There's just a few other ones I want to show here. Okay, this one's good. So if you have an ACEs, by the way, where does it say on here? Traumatic events can have negative lasting effects. Abuse, household challenges, and neglect are the three categories. People with 6+ ACEs can die 20 years earlier than those who have none. 1/8 of the population has more than 4 ACEs. 67% of our population has at least one. That is 2/3 of the humans that we are interacting with on a daily basis has at least one ACEs. Why is that important? I'm a social worker. I need to understand why people behave as they do. If you have a love affair with somebody and it's all hunky-dory, and then you get into a relationship with them and the residue of their ACEs starts coming out in terms of domestic violence or control and manipulation, impulsivity, substance use, all of that, I kind of need to know that's going to impact my child. If I'm dealing with a judge, I kind of need to know that 2/3 of those judges are going to have had at least one ACEs, which, by the way, is an opening to discuss how harmful they are being to others in terms of, I have to know that maybe they've experienced harm so that I can understand why they're reacting in such a way in this case. Their own bias, their own brain wiring, like that's just a really kind of hidden thing that we don't talk about. Like, we all have our own biases. We can't get out of that. So this is a really good picture of, so on the bottom is adverse childhood experiences. And I don't know if you've seen the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Essentially, it's a pyramid, basic needs, and then the higher you go, the more sort of self-evolved you are, is the theory. But there's during the lifespan, it's the ACEs lead to disrupted neurodevelopment, which is the developmental trauma I'm talking about, leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which people do not take into account when we're dealing with adult humans, leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors, leads to disease, disability, social problems, and early death. If you have 4 or more ACEs, you have 3 times the level of lung disease in adult smoking. You have 14 times the number of suicide attempts. You are 4.5 times more likely to develop depression. You are 11 times more likely, with just 4 out of the 10, to use intravenous drugs. You are 4 times as likely to have begun intercourse before the age of 15, and you're 2 times the level of liver disease. Okay, well, have I terrified everybody now?
Well, I think people need to be awakened to this.
I want to show you this one last picture. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty devastating. It's pretty serious. And I think it's like a lot of the abuse around us, it's something we don't talk about, we pretend doesn't exist. And then we can more easily blame the person for their individual behavior instead of blaming ourselves culturally and community-wise. This is just another good picture that I really, really like that explains it. These are sort of environmentally traumatic experiences. These are the root causes: substandard wages, poor air quality and water. These are how it turns out. So just some pictures. Okay, so I've given you a lot of information about the ACEs. I hope I've shared with why it's important to understand that they exist and to know your own score so that you know your own risk factors and that of your partner, your children, the people that you're around. But that's not the end of the story. So why I'm talking about this is because again, awareness is everything. Your child going through this they're likely to have at least one ACEs, just from the scores that we talked about in terms of like a parental abandonment, maybe, whatever, at least one. They're likely to have at least one. But to the parents who are struggling and in bewilderment about why this court case is happening, it is very often that we get into a shame spiral, or it's your fault, he said, she said.
Yeah.
The courts are designed for somebody to win. The courts are designed, there needs to be a good guy and there needs to be a bad guy. That's how we've set this up. I am not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that your ex is not a bad person. What I am suggesting is that this is likely triggering things in you, yourself, and them that are maybe from your past, in terms of, if you just look at the court system and this relationship dynamic with going to family court, having to prove your worth, having to prove yourself, and being let down by the court system, being abandoned by the court system. If
Mhm.
that happened to you as a child, that's going to impact you and your, like, that is something to that listen, I'm a therapist, so I'm going to plug therapy right now. This is a really good time to use it in these cases,
Mhm. Mhm.
because if
Agreed.
a lawyer is being mean to you and you don't, you're just like I just remember when I was in 5 years of psychiatric harm, why are you treating me this way? Like, I don't even know what I did, but you're telling me I'm the problem. But I've lived my life according to X, Y, like, I've succeeded. I've checked all the boxes. Why is this happening? Part of that is innocently, again, our white privilege says this shouldn't happen to us. Unfortunately, it's been happening to BIPOC population since the beginning of time. We've talked about orphan trains. We've
Mhm.
talked about the child trafficking with African American youth and the indigenous youth. And, we, aside from the fact that we don't value children in this country, because if we would actually keep them safe. Don't get me started.
Right, right.
The court system was developed by people like us to criminalize other people. And I'm not saying that personally, I'm saying that collectively. So it makes sense that we would be confused when it would harm us too. It
I
is not set up to help families, it is set up to fund the systems that we collectively innocently have created. The child welfare system, the front of the court, the prison system that is for profit, all of those things. And so I think, again, it's very easy to get into the tunnel vision of, this isn't fair and this is happening to me and I can't do anything about it. All of those are true. And if we walk through the world knowing that everybody, that 2/3 of the population has at least one ACEs, then their behavior is not such a surprise to us. But also, again, like I said, the ACEs are not the end of the stop. If we know the ACEs are there, we want to work in a trauma focused way.
Mhm.
There is a difference between trauma informed and trauma focused. I'm informed about the pains of the world. I'm focused means like I take them into account when I'm dealing with a situation. So trauma focused could be discussed in court cases about your children. Trauma focused means you are directly harming my child by taking them out of the safe environment. Here is how my environment is safe. Here's what you're putting my child at risk for. Here is, the statistics on abuse and all of that. Use this information for yourself, your safety, and the safety of your children. Educate your legal team, even though it's not your job, and yes, you are paying them, but they should be trauma informed in the least. But if they're not, this is a very easy way to say, hey, we have to look at this in a bigger picture. We
Mhm.
have to look at the risk factors that my child is in right now. And again, this isn't the end all be all. I have, just for reflection, yes, I have an ACEs score of 8. Yes, I've survived three hospitalizations, 5 years of psychiatric harm, a substance use. I have now ADHD and autism. Not now discovered. I've always had it, but it's uncovered because we know
Mhm.
more now.
Mhm.
And I have a bachelor's degree. I have a master's degree. I have 5 certifications. I have been a certified diabetes educator. I own 1 business, 2 businesses. I've written 2 books. I have a podcast. You are the solution.
Mhm.
You are the only solution. So sadly, no one is coming to save us. It is I and only I that can change my relationship with what is happening to me in this world. Um, I took legal action. It cost me a lot of money. I took that to get my safety and to keep myself alive. I would be dead if I was still being harmed. And that is, unfortunately, one of my risk factors is suicide, as is some of the parents that you're dealing with. And I got therapy. I got educated. I got community. I got coping skills. I've got psychiatric medications. I have got tools now. When you were, well, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, well, some parents will say, "Well, I don't believe in, taking medications. This, anxiety, you just deal with it." And anxiety and depression go hand in hand, in my opinion, from what I've seen as a psych
Yeah.
nurse and myself. And I can tell you medication can help a, a lot and do other things for you, such as when I had my heart attack, the cardiologist told me your heart attack could have been far worse. It's a good thing you were on Klonopin.
Yes,
This would
yes.
have been far worse. And it's like, well, I didn't know that because it has properties to get rid of the plaque. I don't know what it
I
does.
will I will guarantee you so respectfully that the person that does not want to use psychiatric medications, totally respect that. I will guarantee you they are coping in another way.
Mm.
And my question is that a way that's going to improve your quality of life, or is it declining your quality of life? Are you drinking yourself to bed every night? Are you getting high every night? Or are you going out in nature and attuning with nature? That is one of the key things with this ACEs, is that one of the things that can impact a child's development with any adult human is attunement. And attunement means that my nervous system and your nervous system are co-regulating. We are in tune in a safe way. But if I'm surrounded as a child by people who are anxious, high alert, blood pressure up, irritable, impulsive, reactive, if that is my environment, I, as a child, am being harmed. So I respect that you don't want to take psychiatric medications. I'm good. And I would ask you, if you had cancer, if you would take treatment for cancer,
Mm.
if they would feel the same way, because this is really about saving lives. Okay, fine, don't take a governmental medication. There's mushrooms, there's
Mhm.
ketamine, which is very expensive, there's marijuana. Although, again, every coping skill that we're talking about has a cost and a benefit. I particularly commune with nature a lot more today. I ground myself in nature because nature has never let me down.
Mhm.
Nature has been here since before we were here, and it'll be here long after. And it has survived hurricanes, tornadoes, our own destruction of it. So I'm not arguing with nature, but I will go out and just being around the the leaves swaying. I I think it's amazing that the leaves, the frequency of the leaves making noise has the same frequency as the ocean waves coming in.
Oh, okay.
So that frequency is a healing frequency. And I'm not like, this is Western science. I'm not getting into anything, voodoo-ish or way
Mhm.
off topic. These are known tools that we can use that can help us calm our nervous system. Here's why that matters. We are not calm.
Mm-mm.
We cannot access that executive function. Now, I will argue, again, adrenaline is good in some cases, dopamine is good in some cases, being pumped up and ready for war is good in some cases, but not all day, every day, because it wears your resources down so that when you do go into the courtroom, you're so distracted by these internal things happening that you can't focus and you can't think clearly.
Mhm.
It matters to your children, you and your court case, that we learn tools to calm our nervous system. So it's called resourcing, so that we can resource and come. Like, if you look at a boxing fight, they'll go around, but they take a rest. And if you look at a woman's labor, I've never had children, but the labor process is, first you breathe, you push, and then you rest. And
Mhm.
then you breathe, push, then you rest. It is a cycle. We cannot go, 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 go and get the job done. We must take care of ourselves because we are the only thing that is going to impact this. Yes, we're paying the lawyers. They're imperfect. They have their own agenda. They need to get paid too. They work for us. But oftentimes, as we know, we need to educate the lawyers.
Right. Yeah, and don't be afraid to.
That is your right. That is your right. You're paying them.
Right. I mean, some lawyers expect a parent to automatically know what to do or to say, and I had said to my one lawyer, I said, I didn't know this stuff. I can't remember what the question was or what the scenario was because it was so long ago. But I said, look, I've been a cardiac step down nurse, in the heart department. We give discharge instructions. We explain what to do if this goes on for too long of a time. We give instructions,
Yes.
explain what to do next. You're not doing this. And he sat back and he looked at me like he got it.
Yes. Yeah, and I think again, they get caught up in their own sort of cycle and routine, and they forget that you're brand new to this and you are
Yeah.
sideswiped and you're not thinking clearly anyway most of the time because why would you be if your whole life has just been flipped upside down?
Mm-hmm.
Which is again why it's essential to have these coping skills. I'm not just talking cognitive coping skills. Therapy is great, but I do somatics in my work, and somatics is all this theory about how we have stored this in our body. And if you look at intergenerational trauma, there's a lot coming out about this being true. Um, but the somatics, like you know, go do some punching, go do some jumping jacks, go get some of that anger and rage and anxiety out so that your body can come back to a lower level of engagement and you can actually impact the wiring of your neural networks. You can practice getting into your executive functioning. You can learn how to switch gears from fight, flight, freeze, and fawn into your problem solving, rationalizing, task list making, and part of what anxiety and depression, part of what mental, for lack of a better word, dysfunction does is it clouds up all of that energy in our brain, which is another reason why I actually endorse psychiatric medication. Tell my clients all the time, which don't want to try it. Totally understand. But here's what it does. It turns down the volume enough. It does not cloud you. It does not doesn't make you high. It turns down the noise just enough because there's so much coming in all day, every day that you're exhausted. If you turn down the volume and you're not as in tune with all of it, you can focus on what is important.
Right, right. And with these parents that are representing themselves, which is a pro se
Exhausting.
oh, definitely. I was on, I was with a good psychiatrist who knew what he was doing and dealing with. And, as I said, I was on the Klonopin and Wellbutrin, and that was helping me stay calm enough, so when the opposing attorney was talking, I was able to take notes almost like I had my own transcript, but then I could answer with a clear head what
Yes.
to him, even though I was being ignored because I was a pro se, with evidence and whatever, but at least it's all on the record.
You know, another thing I'm going to say about these ACEs, to your point, is again, you are going to be sort of dismissed and ignored in court. The ACEs is a across the board now recognized as a pretty much a standard. So, like whether I go to healthcare, whether I go to a legal a court of law, whether I go to mental health, at school, by now, most people should have heard the ACEs and what they mean, but they will play negligent, they will play ignorant, and then maybe they haven't yet. But at this point, it is not something out of the left field. It is something very relevant to everything, health, legal. It's relevant enough where if you brought it to the attention, I would like to know if they neglect it, because that is then that might be getting into ADA accommodation, not accommodation, but ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, because
Mhm.
now I'm bringing an attention to a very real factor that you're neglecting. And the ACEs are not necessarily covered under the ADA, but the effects of the ACEs are substance use, mental health, um, uh, physical disability, all those things.
That's a very good point.
So the part of it is learning the language they speak and
Mhm.
speaking to them in the language they will understand. And this is one of those bridges that can help get that language barrier between. I wouldn't know how to go pro se. I think I would be personally, I'd just be way too intimidated, and I just don't have it in me to do it again. But again, like, yes, they have this authority that we've given them, but also they've gained that authority through learning the language that we can use to have them use their power for good and not evil, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. These ACEs scores, everyone should be aware of. In fact, my kids told me they have high ACEs scores. I wonder why, you know.
Right.
Now I do too, from what I've,
Yes. Well, and again, and I'm glad that you've uncovered that, because it didn't start with you, it didn't start with your husband. This is what intergenerational trauma looks like a
Mhm.
generation two down the road. But just because they have them, all we need to know is that we have them. Oh, I'm at higher risk for substance use and mental illness. Maybe I want to be proactive in my mental health. Maybe I want to be wary of using substances to cope, and maybe I want to use some other coping skills, etc., and so on. Like this, okay, fine. Like I have an ACEs. All that
Mhm.
just would have absolutely changed my own treatment trajectory in terms of being trauma focused versus punitive, and how the systems are set up.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean I would have gotten it, but the research is out there for me to know that women with a higher risk of women with a history of trauma are at higher risk of substance use later in life. That would have been some, really good information about 10 years prior.
Yeah. Yeah, everything comes out 15 years later, and
That's how we do. We
learn.
don't really like to look directly at the truth. It's too much of a threat. So we'll tiptoe around it, we'll dance around it, we'll neglect it, we'll avoid it, and then we'll wonder innocently why the court system is harming us.
Mhm.
It's been harming people since it began, just not us. And we thought we were safe. Us meaning white people. We thought we were safe.
Mhm.
There is no safety when there's a top down win lose mentality. That is, somebody's going to lose,
Mhm.
somebody's going to win.
Yeah, the middle class, upper middle class, they don't think this can happen to them. And I've talked to 2 separate people, and they said, "Well, um, our kids, we don't have anything to worry about." I said, "Yeah, that's what I thought."
Right. Right. And we're so comfortable. Oh, listen, I'm glad we have this empire of illusion of safety around us, but look at how that's working out for our country right now. The greatest country in the world, and we can't even have a conversation with each other. That's nobody. That is our collective. That's not. I. It, when you've grown up in a religious context, I grew up in a religious evangelical church, but good and evil, all of this stuff. Like it's really, we like to think the easy um explanation is that that person deserved harm. They need to be in jail because they use drugs. They need to be in jail because they use stuff. They stole something, probably because they didn't have enough money to get their basic needs met. And why is that? Like,
Mm.
why is it that some people need to be harmed for our system to continue, so that the other people can have the illusion any other people, I don't care, pick a culture, the other people can have the illusion of safety, but it's coming for you too. There is no safety out there. The safety isn't here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's not be fooled. Let's not be fooled. The court system does great things on record, but overall, there is a lot of harm that happens in the courts all day, every day, that we just don't see because innocently we tune it out.
Mhm.
That's not a personal blame on anybody. That's, we're so busy trying to survive in our own lives and
Mhm.
dealing with our own financial stressors that we don't, again, our executive functioning is not, we're like 3 generations away from the people that lost their jobs. You live in the Rust Belt, do you not? The Pennsylvania?
Yep.
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
I live in Detroit. The there's devastating effects. My town was a country club town that I grew up in,
Mhm.
and now it's unfortunately people are resorting to the use of substances,
Mm.
and because there's no jobs there.
Yeah.
How's that going to affect a child development, let alone getting a divorce? And the judges, again, we all know in small towns the judges, they are very biased, and they're using their power for their own personal gain, which is what we on some level teach everybody is what we should all be doing. But it doesn't seem to be working out too well for our children. And
No.
I don't have any children, and so I take it personally that I work with the children that are harmed by other people.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and the children grew up into adults, and then the adults come to me full of shame and guilt, confused about how they got where they got. And I
Mhm.
have to go back and explain all this to them, like, listen, this didn't start with you, but it can end with you.
Right. Right.
You are not helpless. You have tools. You are not powerless. They will want you to feel powerless. That's part of the goal.
Mhm.
You can take your power back by taking care of your well-being and, doing therapy, using whatever you need to do. But they don't have the last word.
No, be the cycle breaker.
Yeah,
And that's what we have to focus on. This is why I'm so glad I had you on. This was an awesome topic.
glad. I hope it helps somebody.
Oh, I know it will. And I will put all your the way people can contact you, all your websites.
Okay.
I'll just carry that through from the other podcasts that you were on. I have you on like every 3 months.
Yeah,
And it's
and I
like,
appreciate it.
yeah, and again, Laurie Smith has the Clouded Compass. I suggest
That's
everyone go ahead.
So that's coaching that I can do across state lines. That's private pay. I also have my therapy business in the state of Michigan. I do also, because of women and people like me, I do ADHD and autism evaluations in the state of Michigan. But I'm available for consults, trainings. I have that podcast. I think we're on the same page that things are really dark and harmful, and I want to offer some solutions.
Yes, yes, we're looking for solutions, and this was great, and I totally thank you for coming on. I'm gonna have you back on.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you.
Definitely. So, hey, don't jump off, okay?
Yeah.
Slam the Gavels, a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee. You can find that in the podcast notes to help keep this podcast going. And I totally thank you, Laurie Smith. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just so glad I had you on today.
Thanks for the opportunity.